crow's wet feathers. End it. By the way, in Russian, the crow's wet feathers supposedly means the peak of despair. Given that you could romantically describe this island as the ultimate destination for those in despair, just as the opposite of affection isn't hatred, but indifference, the opposite of hope isn't despair. Surely the opposite of despair is apathetic acceptance of all things. That sheer apathy laced with absolute conviction that allows you to approve of all things, saying, yeah, that's fine. That is the opposite of hope. Everything is here, so what more could I possibly need? This apathy I felt was way over the line of normality, the proverbial destination of all one's emotions. That non-interfering realm on the other side of the lake that we all view at some point with admiring eyes laced with envy. The domain on the other side of taboo, connected to reality by a big equal sign. To reach said domain, you had to make many sacrifices. What's more, it was a one-way ticket with no guarantees. However, even then, there are people who reach it, whether by some mistake or through knowledge. Ibuki Kanami, Soniyama Akane, Soshirano Yuyoi, Himane Maki, Akagami Iria, Chiga Akari, Chiga Hikari, Chiga Teriko, Handere, and Kunigisa Tomo. This is all probably a big hulled heap of ridiculous mumbo-jumbo, nothing but boring, worthless nonsense, and the continuation of this nonsense is unwholesome at best. Really now, what kind of clown was I? Have you figured something out? The 5th dinner assembly. Teriko-san had her personal chores to attend to, so her seat was empty, but the other 9 of us were all gathered together. 9 people. Until the day before yesterday, just 2 days ago, there were 12 of us surrounding this round table. Do I have to ask again? Kurigisa-san, you're all still doing some investigating, correct? Well, have you figured anything out? Iria-san asked. She seemed to have an awful lot of fun. I'm sure she was. Of course, it was fun, because she probably created a whole world in her head. Because this island, this wet crow's feather island, was, in itself, her whole world. Shall I ask again? We know absolutely, positively nothing at all, I answered. So what about it? Is there a problem? Oh, no. I was just thinking, I guess there's nothing we could do without a specialist after all, Iria-san said with apparent interest. Well, I guess the best thing then is to continue operating in teams like this for the next 3 days. 3 days, Shinya-san said. I must say, you seem to be expecting quite a bit from this person. Just what kind of person is this Aikawa-san anyway? How did you meet? That's a private matter, Iria-san smirked. But I'll tell you what kind of person. What should I say? Aikawa-san is a very frightening person. Well, that's what you expect from the world's most powerful contractor, but also incredibly intelligent. I'm sure this case will be solved in no time. I really can't wait. The detective, huh? Solving the case before the lead detective even got here probably disqualified me as a supporting character, I thought. But my life was on the line here too, and there were various complicated circumstances. I couldn't just sit around and wait for the main character to show up. It was his own fault for being late. Maki-san snickered next to me. She seemed to be having an awful lot of fun as well. I didn't know whether or not she was reading my thoughts or just watching the whole farce. Surely it was at least one of those, but that probably wasn't the only reason she was laughing. Really, just who was this woman who was able to continue laughing even after knowing everything in the entire world? She was probably deserving of respect. Still, I avoided eye contact. I'm told Aikawa-san will be here this afternoon, 3 days from now at the latest. After that, I'm sure everyone will soon be. As Iria-san expounded over this detective of hers, she was interrupted by the sound of overturning flat wire and pots banging together, accompanied by a screech. Enough! It was Yuyoi-san. Raising from her seat, Yuyoi-san used her right arm to shove off the table all of the food she herself had made. She then proceeded to take the now dirty tablecloth and yank it, causing all the dishes to come toppling off the table and shatter. The string of ear-shattering noises echoed through the dining room. Enough of this! She banged her hands on the table. Sashirano-san, in an effort to settle her down, Hikari-san rose from her seat, as well as approach her, but Yuyoi-san gave her a violent shove. What is all this? Give me a break! I want out of this farce! Detectives, sealed rooms, decapitated corpses? This isn't some mystery novel! Don't you realize people are being killed? Why the hell are you eating during this kind of discussion? Their heads were cut off! Don't eat my food while you're talking about such a thing. You must all be crazy if you're able to stay calm about this. Why don't you care about people who are killed? You're all disgusting. Since when was it okay to kill people in this country? Sashirono-san, Hikari-san said from the floor. Please, calm down. You're the killer! Yayoi-san screamed even louder. It's obvious. We already know that. You were the only one with the key to the storage room, and you visited Soniyama-san's room in the middle of the night, didn't you? That's when you killed her. And you must have killed Ibuki-san too. You don't have any proof of that. You shouldn't say such things without proof, Yayoi-san. I tried my best to stay cool as I reprimanded her. There's no proof that Hikari-san is the murderer. Proof? I don't give a hoot about proof! But there's no reason Hikari-san would have done such a thing. It's not that you could expect to understand how a maniac's mind works. She's probably going to use it for some kind of ritual. To call upon God. No more, no more, no more! Why are you trying to come near me? You think you'll take my head next? Never! Yoi-san, please calm down. I'm plenty calm. I'm fine. You're all the crazy ones. You're all nuts. You're all disgusting. Get yourselves together. I can't stand you. I can't even talk to you. What language are you all speaking? Detective, sealed room, severed heads. What the hell language is that? I'm the only one from Earth here. If that's the case, I'll just leave right now. I don't want to be on this maniac island anymore. I don't want to talk to you people. Bam. She slammed the table once again. I don't trust any of you. From now on, I'm staying in my room. I'm barricading myself in. Call me when you're ready to send me back to the mainland. Otherwise, leave me the hell alone. Don't come near me. With that, Yayoi-san stormed off towards the dining room exit. Sashirono-san, Hikari-san called once more, but Yayoi-san didn't even look back, and eventually she was gone from sight. A brief awkward silence. Oh my, Irie-san eventually said with slumped shoulders. And here I thought she was so polite. What a temper. She continued. Oh, what now? She sighed. Hikari-san's going through all the trouble to come here. I can't just send one of the suspects home. Hikari, this is your responsibility. Go do something to convince her. Yes, ma'am, Hikari-san said with her head down. Understood, my mistress. Oh, dinner is all ruined. Hikari, will you hurry and make us something? Now just where has Terika gone at a time like this? Indeed, dinner was ruined just as Irie-san had said, but it was a necessary sacrifice. It wasn't my money, and of course, you shouldn't waste food, but I wasn't the only one who had done it anyway. It was Yoi-san, the one who had made the food in the first place. Kurigisa stared at the fallen smashed dishes with a look of despair. Not the food, but the dishes. Perhaps she was thinking of her destroyed computers, which were the same shade of white. Hey, catcher. Kurigisa looked at me. What, Ichan? I better get going. I'll leave this to you. Gotcha, she nodded. I rose from my seat and headed for the door. I could hear sounds of trouble brewing behind me. I turned to find Kunigisa had climbed over the table and jumped Shinya-san. It was admittedly a slightly enviable sight for me, but for now I had to let it go. Besides, I couldn't take Kunigisa with me. Running down the hall with one eye closed, I climbed the stairs and eventually spotted Yayoi-san by her room. She was leaning up against the wall, a vacant look on her face. She looked up at me. She sighed with relief. How was I? You gave a star performance. Performance, huh? It was more than half true, really, she said as she continued walking with me. But is it really true? Is that person really the killer? You checked it yourself, right? Yeah, the smell was right, but I don't have much faith in my sense of smell. I'm not a dog after all. You just like one, though. That's not a compliment, you know. Yeah, I knew. Kanami-san once told me something similar. It's not a compliment if you say, you're like such and such. Well, what woman wouldn't be offended after being compared to a dog? I apologized innocently. We had arrived at the door of Yayoi-san's room. So what do we do from here? Yayoi-san, please go back to the dining room. It's dangerous here. Then, why are you doing it? She asked, simply out of suspicion. I feel like there must be another way. This is just my speculation, but it feels like you're deliberately picking the most dangerous possible option. In this world, there are people who die from eating too much, and people who die from starvation. The former is overwhelmingly more common, but it seems you're the latter type. Don't overestimate me. That wasn't a compliment. With that, she gave me a nod, and slowly headed back the way we came. Dangerous man. Dangerous man, I whispered to myself. Of course, I was well aware of this. I had complete understanding of the dangers I faced when I decided to do this, which I suppose really did make me some starving to death type. Now that's nonsense. After a brief mental preparation, I slowly, gently opened the door to Yoisan's room. Dark inside. Unable to see much of anything, I took a step inside. Swoosh! The sound of sliced air. I did a forward roll and slid into the room. I rose to one knee and opened the eye that had been closed. This way I could make out the inside of the room at least a little bit. Someone closed the door behind me. I could see the face clearly, and in that moment learned that my hypothesis had been correct. My opponent wore a slight look of surprise, but only held it for a moment before brandishing a hatchet. A hatchet? At me. Silent. My attacker didn't say a word. With a deep breath, I rose to my feet. It had been quite some time since I'd done any acrobatics. Not that I'd been bad at it, just that my skills definitely dulled in the few months since coming back to Japan. As if realising the immediate need to settle this, my attacker moved first, shuffling towards me. With Kunigisa holding Shinya-san down, someone would eventually come save me, as long as I could buy some time. There was no need to go on the offensive. In fact, I wanted to get out of there, but my attacker was standing between me and the door, so it probably would have posed quite a challenge. For now, I just had to focus on dodging attacks. This sort of passive thinking had me written all over it, but it was no good. In focusing my gaze entirely on my attacker's hatchet, I completely neglected to pay any attention to my feet. My attacker faked with the hatchet and came with a leg sweep. It made a glorious connection. Unable to even roll back to my feet, instead, my back slammed into the carpet. My attacker proceeded to mount me and pin me down my shoulder. It all happened in a single instant. The match was essentially over. Maybe I should have spent those mornings running marathons instead of going for walks. Or maybe I should have continued going to the dojo even when I got back to Japan. Well, truth be told, it didn't really make much difference whether I was killed or not. At this point, Kunigisa had probably explained everything to the others, and Yoisan had probably returned to the dining room as well. Either way, there was no chance my attacker would escape. I had lost the match, but the tournament was ours, so this was fine. Now then, the hatchet. Use the hatchet. Die. My attacker's cold, familiar voice. I realised I had completely given up. What was this sensation? Why? Why was I even willing to give up my own life? I didn't want to live? It wasn't that I wanted to die, but I didn't want to live either. Life was a big hassle, but I wasn't jumping at the idea of death specifically. Was there nothing important to me? Nothing I wanted? Nothing I wanted to protect? Is that why I was so ready to give up? No. It was because even if I died here, no one would be bothered. Kunigisa wouldn't be bothered. Maki-san. Did you know this was coming? If so, I suppose I'm grateful you didn't let me know about it. I now knew the reason Maki-san, who knew all, had said nothing. You die exactly when you should, though I wasn't quite in that frame of mind yet. Indeed, just as Terika-san said, I really should just die. Seriously. Hey, but the hatchet wasn't coming down. It was raised way up in the air, then just stopped. Looking up in confusion, I saw no taunting expression, but rather a twisted grimace, as my attacker struggled and fought back the hatchet down. You don't close your eyes, do you? There was another person. It wasn't the voice of a person on top of me. I couldn't see from where I was, but this third person must have grabbed the hatchet while it was up in the air and refused to let it go. Who was it? Had Yoisan come to save me? Had Kunigisa followed me here? But neither of those seemed feasible possibilities. The third person wrenched the hatchet upward, and the same instant delivered the beautiful, truly glorious low kick to my attacker's now completely open side. Unable to take the blow, my attacker rolled off me and slammed into the nearby sofa. In another instant, though, the assailant was back to 2 feet and face to face with the third person. In one fell swoop, I had become a mere spectator. At this point, for some reason, the third person drew away the hatchet, and here there was such a golden opportunity to use it. Could this have been a gesture of sportsmanship? At a time like this? Unlike when fighting me, this time the attacker attempted no reckless leaping, but there was a time limit here. If this didn't get settled fast, there'd be a chance that Kunigisa would finish explaining everything and bring others here. But this third person didn't repeat my mistake. Bam! Came the sound of feet hitting the floor, as the third person sprang towards my attacker, covering as much as 6 feet in a single stride. In a Japanese Kenpo-style motion, the third person used the momentum from a leap to deliver a straight punch. Instead of dodging back or to the side, my attacker instead contorted diagonally. Both dodging the punch and closing in on the third person at the same time, my attacker then grabbed the third person by the throat. But the third person delivered a straight punch without even trying to avoid my attacker's clutch. My attacker, still in defensive mode, was unable to dodge. The punch connected straight with the heart. The attacker let out a groan, but refused to release the person's throat. Then, almost effortlessly, my attacker slid past the third person's side and delivered a back kick to the calf. The third person stumbled. It appeared my attacker intended to use this opportunity to slam the third person into the floor. Watching them from the sidelines, even I thought this was the end. But it didn't end. The third person used my attacker's arm as a pivot axis and swung up while shifting in mid-air, causing them both to fall to the floor together with my attacker's arm in a lock. It was a judo offense through defense technique. Another instant. The surprisingly dull, almost anticlimactic sound of breaking bone echoed through the dark room. The third person released the arm and stood up. My attacker followed suit, and began to stand up too, but before managing to get up all the way, took a merciless kick to the already seemingly broken arm. My attacker flew through the air and over the sofa, then came to the sound of the shattering glass table, and my attacker fell back on the sofa. The third person exhaled a deep breath with complete calm. We had a winner. I was utterly speechless. At least, the third person faced me, and then, without so much as a smirk, said, "When you're about to die, I think you should close your eyes. Didn't you say that guys like me should die?" I mumbled faintly. "Oh, that," she tilted her head. "That was a lie," Terika-san said. Slowly shaking my head, I held my hand out to her. I figured the chances were 50-50, but she grabbed my hand and pulled me to my feet. "What are you doing here?" "No reason. It was just inevitable." "What are you talking about?" "Don't worry about it. It's just nonsense." Now that was my line. "Thank you." After pulling me back to my feet, she let go of my hand and looked at me with those out-of-focus eyes. "No need to thank me. More important," a brief pause. "There's something that's been bothering me." "What?" This was a fairly heavy statement to make. What was she about to say? I couldn't even imagine. Dark. My eyes had completely adjusted to the darkness, but even still, I couldn't read Teriko-san's expression. Just like my own heart, just like the hearts of others. "Your question from this afternoon," she said, with the same old pale tone and cold gaze. "I know you were speaking metaphorically. Were you talking about Kunigisa-san? Or yourself?" The child locked in the basement, deprived of communication with anyone else for 10 years. Once again, I reached out to touch Terika-san's hand for no reason at all. For an instant, our fingers touched, and then, in the moment of separation, an eardrum-shattering sound. The feeling of shock wave ran through my entire body. Terika-san's body slumped onto me, like dead weight. I held onto her as she rested her entire weight on me. There was no time to stand there and savour the warm touch of her expectedly light body. My eyes were still glued to the sofa, or, to be more specific, the woman sitting there holding a handgun, sitting there totally aloof. My eyes were glued to it. It was a black gun, a relatively popular model. I had even seen a few overseas. I sure didn't expect there to be one in this country, though. She had a Glock. Why she hadn't used the gun until now was obvious. No matter how big the mansion was, it still wasn't big enough to stop the sound of a gunshot from reaching every corner of it. In other words, this was probably the final ace up her sleeve. It was an illegal move, an absolutely forbidden method. In which case, the day was mine. I still had my ace, though maybe I'd let the time to use it slip away. And so, the conclusion continued, the resolution to the final scene. A voice, a faint voice, and then the gun barrel turned towards me. She said something. I couldn't hear. My ears were still ringing from the gun blast. My eardrums were probably okay, just momentarily paralysed. But in a situation like this, that meant the same thing, it didn't look as if she was going to wait for my hearing to come back. What did she say? It kind of bothered me. This was checkmate. Farewell. How stupid. What were you trying to do? You want to die in a place like this? What were you living for anyway? She was probably saying something along those lines. Or no, maybe she wasn't saying anything at all. Either way, there's no meaning in words you can't hear. Just like there's no meaning in feelings you don't express. Out of stream, I looked at her. Over Teriko-san's shoulder, fast the muzzle of the gun. Just I thought, this was the end. Naturally, I didn't believe anyone was coming to rescue me from this crisis, and this was pretty much what I expected to happen. Of course, I didn't mean to get Teriko-san involved, but aside from that, everything had gone more or less according to plan. That's because my one and only plan was to not involve Kunigisa. Nothing else mattered. Really, it didn't matter. I was apathetic and indifferent. There was no future. There was no past. I had forgotten about being born long ago, oblivious to the fact that I was alive. Reality was nothing more than a synonym for illusion to me, and that was never an antonym for dream. At this point, Terako-san's body resting on me, my throbbing ankle pain, my paralyzed train of thought, my breaking values, my melting ethics, my collapsing morals, Kanami-san's neck, Akane-san's neck, the truth behind the incident, the culprit, the killer, the murderer, the splitting girl, none of it mattered now. I would forgive it all. So, pull the trigger. Please end it. Ka-ching. The sound of the gun cocking. A sound I had heard 1,000,000 times abroad. And so, finally, here. Ichan! The sound of the door slamming open, light piercing the room with such ferocity that my eyes stopped functioning for a moment. There was no need for visual confirmation of who was pointing the gun at me. Even with my stunned eardrums, her voice had managed to reach me. But I could barely believe it. Kunigisa Tomo was standing there alone. Ridiculous. That wasn't possible. I left her on the first floor so she couldn't do this. I had left her on the first floor because she was unable to climb stairs alone. She wasn't supposed to be able to come here alone. But she was indeed alone. With tears in her eyes, she wore a terribly exhausted expression. She was panting, clutching her chest. She looked as if she was ready to collapse at any moment. But she forced herself to remain standing, and she was alone. This is... Wait a minute here. This can't be it. This can't be. Someone must be with her. If no one was with her, it would have been impossible for her to climb the spiral staircase. Maybe 1 or 2 steps, but not this. It was impossible. Had she really come all the way up here alone, despite her affliction? All this way. To be sure, it wasn't physically impossible, but obsessive-compulsive disorders aren't just something to be taken lightly. They aren't some minor thing you can just conquer them with willpower. I know for a fact that defying one's own subconscious is not a walk in the park. However, Kunigisa had heard the gunshot, and despite it being deathly agonizing, despite it being painful, despite it being so painful that in a worst-case scenario, she really might have died, she had forced herself up the stairs, forgetting to even bring someone along, suppressing the urge to vomit, clutching her own heart, forcing those reluctant legs to keep moving, lashing out at her own fear-ridden soul, with that heart much too fragile for living, enduring the anguish of the depths of hell, all just to reach me, casting all things aside, Kunigisa, for me. Why? The pressure, it was heartbreaking to the point of brutality. I really was a clown feeling like this. This pathetic feeling. What was the name for this? Why are you always shaking me up? You, really, since the ancient past. Nothing's changed. Whip. The woman removed me from her sights. I retrained them to Kunigisa. Hey! What are you doing? You were going to shoot me. Why are you aiming that gun over there? No such necessity exists, damn it. Or are such things meaningless to you? Are things like necessity and reality non-existent to a skewed world in which you live? The light. Gradually my eyes were adjusting. Her eyes were probably doing the same. Kunigisa, however, who unlike us, were adapting to the dark, not the light, couldn't yet make out my attacker's features. Dark adaptation takes longer than light adaptation. Consequently, if she were to shoot now, there was no way Kunigisa could dodge it. I jumped up, but by the time I was on my feet, it was too late. There was no point. There was no way I could make it to Kunigisa in time. I couldn't outrun a bullet. Even if I could, there would be no point. I couldn't just die in front of Kunigisa. I was too late. I was too late, just as I was years ago. Just like all the time. In which case, there was nothing I could do. Oh. It seemed Kunigisa was able to spot me. Without even glancing a direction at the handgun, without letting my attacker even enter my field of vision, she stuck her finger out and grinned. Oh, thank God. You're okay, right, Ichan? With that smile, with that selfless smile, with that ragged, worn-out smile, with Kunigisa Tomo, who was completely oblivious to the circumstances, I was... truly... I'm in love with her, I said to myself. Yep, it was something I had always known. It was obvious. It was so obvious to me that there was never need to put it into words. There was no need for words between us. Of course, it was a completely self-aware matter. From the instant I had met her, I had chosen Kunigisa Tomo, to the point that I didn't care about anything else. I didn't need to be loved or even be chosen. Please, stop, I begged my attacker. She remained motionless for a while, but then she spun the gun around and pointed it to the ground and continued laughing. Like she was truly having a ball, laughter like singing. Dragging my feet, I made my way over to Kunigisa and grabbed her by the shoulders. Her body had become thoroughly hot. There was enough to discern how much she had struggled to make it here. I held Kunigisa to cover her, and trained my eyes back to my attacker. She was looking back at us, holding each other. Well, I've still got some complaints, but she opened her mouth. From a guy like you, just hearing something that honest is good enough for now, I guess, she said. That's what I was waiting to hear last night, after all, Soniyama Akane said cynically, and tossed the handgun aside. Ugh, you've got a huge bruise here, Ichan. With my pant leg rolled up, Kunigisa patted the bruise on my ankle. This blue-haired goon probably didn't realize how much that patting hurt. Hikari-san had brought me anti-swelling medicine, so I stuck it on. It felt as if the warmth had drained from my body. This was comfort. Akane-chan was so tough. Not that she ever looked like much of a pushover, Kunigisa said. Didn't you know, Ichan? Why would I? Who could have known that the Seven Fools would turn out to be freaking tough? This isn't a video game or something. She was a complete force to be reckoned with. I hadn't expected her to be so overwhelmingly tough, and I certainly hadn't expected her to have a handgun prepared. I had had a number of brushes with death by now, but this was by far the most dangerous. If Teruka-san hadn't come to my rescue, things would have gone really bad. You have to be careful. That body doesn't belong to you alone, you know, says you, woman. Since the showdown, we had entered a phase of treating the wounded, dictated by common sense as the primary concern. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it, but after a while, the damage from the initial leg sweep became much more apparent, so I was now undergoing treatment in Kunigisa's room. You hit your back as well, didn't you? Did it hurt? Hikari-san said. Please, take care. Akane-san was in the karate club in high school, you know. I think I've heard that before. She even participated in the national tournament. Man, teach me that stuff. Yeah, but apparently she only won 5 matches. You only need 5 matches to win the national tournament. As for Akane-san's wounds, first there was her broken arm. Then there was that first kick, which had apparently broken 4 ribs. Even in the early phases of the showdown, she had suffered a major wound. Yet she was able to jump around like that. It was no small feat. Meanwhile, Teruka-san was undergoing treatment with Hikari-san. Skin around her throat had been scratched off from when Akane-san was strangling her, and there had been bleeding, but she had suffered no other notable wounds. At the time of that gunshot, I had thought that the bullet hit her square in the back, but in fact, it hadn't hit her at all. I thought she had fallen into my arms from the force of being shot, but it was actually a result of her dodging the bullet. Perhaps it was her reaction to the sound of the gun being cocked. She was like one of the Charlie's Angels. Not to mention, afterwards, she was playing dead. Actually, that's not quite right, Hikari-san said. I'm sure she was just shielding you. Shielding me? Indeed, depending on how you looked at it, that wasn't an impossibility. So you're saying she was risking her life for me? No, her life wasn't particularly in danger. Teruka's apron is bulletproof. Bulletproof? She wasn't an angel, she was a battle maid. What the hell had happened to reality? Yes, Spectra is sewn into her clothes. Unlike Kevlar, Spectra can withstand a number of shots without weakening, and it's light so you don't get sweaty. Teruka is nigh invincible in short range, but she takes caution with long-range defenses. See how long the skirt is on the apron dress? That's because it works like an Akido Hakama. It sounded like a terrible joke, but it was hard to tell based on Hikari-san's expression. Maybe it was better to just let it go. But why is Teruka-san so strong? Are you two strong too? I asked. No, Teruka is our mistress-resident bodyguard, in a sense. Our roles are fundamentally different. Up to now, you've never seen all 3 of us doing the same job, have you? Come to think of it, it did seem as if Hikari-san and Akari-san were always the ones at work. As a former participant in the R3 program, maybe it was unforgivable that I hadn't noticed until now. Yeah, it sounded pretty bad. But I'm sure glad she rescued you. I'm sure you've noticed by now that she can be awfully cold. Saving you is one thing, but staking her own life to shield you, it almost doesn't make sense. Yeah, about that. Why did she do it? well, she's a whimsical girl, just like everyone else here. But it wasn't completely beyond my comprehension. I still didn't know for sure how Terika-san felt, but insofar as she was still a mystery to me, I was no doubt just as much of a mystery to her. Surely she just wanted to ask about me. That's a bunch of nonsense, though. Come to think of it, she had seemed abnormally strong when she grabbed my arm that afternoon, but I would never have imagined that was some kind of foreshadowing. It seems like your back and hips are okay. You didn't hit your head, did you? Well then, that's a wrap, Kunigisa said, and sticking close to me began to massage my shoulders. This was heaven. Now then, shall we head back to the dining room? This was hell. Right. The non-injured guests had all been left waiting anxiously for Kunigisa and me in the dining room. Unbelievably. Terrifyingly. Tomo, you go on alone. These injuries are way worse than I thought. I don't think I can go. Whatever, but you know, Ii-chan, this is your chance to look good in front of Akari-chan. If you're smooth, you might get something out of it. Oh my. Do you have Akari on the mind? She loves smart people, you know. Kunigisa and Hikari-san were happily double-teaming me with suggestions. What were they? Middle school students? Tomo, you know how much I hate stuff like that. You don't need me to explain it, right? Just think something up yourself. Ii-chan, didn't you do this kind of thing abroad? Performances or presentations or what have you? Well, yeah, but they were hell every time. They would always bitch at me, you know, like, quit talking around your subject, or you're being too vague, or nobody's interested in your problems. I know, I should just do it, right? Just do it. Don't weasel out of this, Kunigisa's smirk said. Come on, you'll get into trouble. You have to be more cheerful about this. I know that's probably impossible for you, but anyway, let's get going. Tie my hair up first. Huh? You don't like it that way? Feels like my head's being pulled on. 1 or 2 tails is better after all. And here I liked it. Tomo-san, would you like me to do it? Kunigisa shook her head. Putting my hair up is Ii-chan's job. Yes. I redid her hair and our preparations were complete. Well, let's go. Slowly the gates of hell opened. I was feeling quite heavy-footed, and it wasn't just because of my injuries. What a bunch of nonsense, I muttered, as I arrived in the dining room. Everyone besides Akane-san, whose wounds were severe, was gathered there. That, of course, included Shinya-san. As if he had already given up, as if the burden had been taken off his shoulders, he had a calm air around him as he watched us walk through the door. Maki-san sneered at me, making me think that I was about to be harassed again, but she remained silent. Lined up on the table was the remade food Yayoi-san had prepared while we were being treated. Possibly because Yayoi-san had calmed down, this time the food was remarkably fancier. Akari-san, still feeling awkward, avoided eye contact. Terika-san had bandages wrapped around her neck. Rei-san watched over the scene in complete silence. And then there was Akagami Iria-san. She was looking at me with challenging eyes. Well then, shall we have you begin? Iria-san said to me, as I took my seat. What is all this? Allow me to explain. Soniyama Akane-san of the ER3 Seven Fools is the killer of Ibuki Kanami-san's caretaker. Sakaki Shinya-san over there is her accomplice. Silence. And that's it. Give us 30 minutes, she insisted. The first thing I want you to explain is what Soniyama-san was doing in Yayoi's room. That's easy. Yayoi-san flew out of the dining room, right? Thus, Yayoi-san was the next person to be somewhere by herself, so Akane-san used it as an opportunity to kill her. The idea had been to have Akane-san's plan backfire, but instead things had backfired on me, and Terika-san had to save me. And ultimately, I had to rely on Akane-san's kindness. That hatchet she had brandished at me surely would have lopped off my head. I'm very grateful to Terika-san. No, I don't mean that. You know what I mean. Wasn't Soniyama-san killed? In the sealed storage room? As you saw, she's alive, I shrugged. Assuming she doesn't have a twin. I think we can all agree that it was Akane-san. So what about the headless body in the storage room? Well, Akane-san is alive, so that wasn't her body. That's just logical thinking. It was someone else's corpse? If you see a headless body, beware of switching. That's the cardinal rule of detective novels, right? I'm sure your darling detective would say the same thing. Iria-san tilted her head at me, as if to show that it was beyond her comprehension. Just wait a second. I'm thinking. She wanted a moment to contemplate things alone. I was a bit impressed by her spirit. Well, in the meantime, I might ask something. Shinji-san raised his hand. I've got a question for you there. I don't mind. I nodded. I thought for sure that I'd be asked when I realised the truth behind the instance, or how I figured out the killer, or something like that. But Shinji-san's question was totally different from my expectations. Is that wound on your foot okay? Yes. It's made a bruise, though. Really? So it's not broken? That woman, he snorted. Or maybe she couldn't break it, though that's not like her. Or is it? I wasn't sure what all his whispering meant. Finally, Irie-san said capitulatingly, I don't get it at all. There's really a switch? There was. Kunagisa's computers were destroyed, right? The third instant, nobody could have done that. Literally. Precisely nobody. Everybody served as everybody else's witness, so alibis and accomplices weren't even a matter of concern. We were all watching one another the whole time. Nobody could have done it. Nobody who was there, anyway. Therefore, the only person who could have done it would have been someone who wasn't there with us. That's just logical thinking. I gathered that much, Irie-san said. You don't need to keep emphasizing that it's logical. You're the kind of smart aleck, aren't you? So whose headless body was it in the storage room? Everybody was here together. There wasn't a single person who could have been switched with Soniyama-san's body. Isn't that strange to you? Well, it is strange, but I decided to give her an easy understanding analogy. Do you know this quiz? Or actually, it's more like a trick in a form of fraud, but anyway. I pulled out the alibi chart and turned it over to the back. There, I drew a big rectangle. Then, I drew 9 lines through it. In other words, a 10-box chart. What is that? Irie-san asked. Something to do with this? Please pretend that these are telephone booths. 10 telephone booths. Now, let's put 11 people in them. Phone booths? Oh, I mean, they're just boxes. They could be rooms. 10 rooms. Yup. I nodded. Incidentally, this was a magic trick I picked up from a book I read while I was in elementary school. Okay, so let's say A-kun tries to enter the first box, but the second person enters before him. I wrote X on the first box. Now, for the third person, I wrote X on the next box. The fourth person, I wrote yet another X on the next box. The fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth people, the ninth person, and the 10th person. So now, we've got 10 people in boxes, but there's still one box left over. So let's stick the first guy, A-kun, in there. I draw an X in the final box. And so, we fit 11 people into 10 boxes. Do you get it? That's stupid, Irie-san said. The first person never entered the box, so it was off by one person. Yes, that's correct. It's a rudimentary trick that anyone can figure out with a little thought, but if done with right timing and skill, nobody notices. Yes, they do. They don't. We didn't notice. I don't have any idea what you're talking about, and this is all off topic. I'm asking whose body was in the storage room. Everybody was gathered here, no matter how you look at it, that makes us one person short. Or are you saying that there was some 13 person on the island? Not possible. There were 12 people on this island. Let's assume that's a given. Well then, who was it? As of now, there are 11 people alive on this island. Akagami Irie-san, Chiga Akari-san, Hikari-san, and Terika-san. Handare-san, Himane Maki-san, Shasharona Yuyoi-san, Kunagisa Tomo, Sekaki Shinya-san, Soniyama Akane-san, and then finally, there's me. So the answer should be clear. I allowed a brief pause. It was Ibuki Kanami-san. With the corpse wrapped up in a sleeping bag, it didn't get dirty even when we buried it. After we left the burial site, Shinya-san dug Kanami-san's body back up. Then, with body in tow, he headed for the storage room window. From the outside, I mean. He knocked on the window, and Akane-san opened it from the inside. In went the body, and they made the switch. That's basically it. Taking a look around the crowd to see their reaction, especially Shinya-san's, I continued. It was strange. When we went to bury Kanami-san's body, Shinya-san brought a sleeping bag along. It was a coffin. But hold the phone there a second. Why would he have a sleeping bag? Maybe if it was a camping trip, but nobody here would bring a sleeping bag when they've been invited to a mansion. So maybe he was already at the mansion to begin with. See, that's what I had thought. I thought Irie-san had offered it to him for the sake of burial. Certainly in a mansion like this, a mansion that offers beds with canopies even in the guest rooms, it's a little unnatural for there to be sleeping bags lying around, but it's not impossible. So that's what I thought. But the second time, when Akane-san's corpse, actually Kanami-san's corpse, again, was discovered, Hikari-san brought us a stretcher. Is there some reason why you'd offer a sleeping bag for the first person, but not for the second? Not likely. Even if there was a reason, Hikari-san would have told me. And so one assumption crumbles. There was no sleeping bags here after all. Shinya-san must have brought one himself, even though this isn't camping. It's as if he knew from the start he would need something in which to bury a body. He knew that he couldn't let the body get dirty. So he recycled the body. Bingo. You've got it. Shinya-san and Akane-san murdered Kanami-san, and from her created a new, phantom corpse. That's basically it. But there was blood in the storage room, Irie-san said. If that body was a day old, there wouldn't have been so much blood. There was no way for us to determine whether or not that was Akane-san's blood. Maybe the police could have. Indeed, if the police were here, this crazy incident never would have happened. But you didn't want to call the police. Understandable, due to certain circumstances. You couldn't call them. Knowing that, Akane-san was free to assume that even if there was another incident, the police wouldn't come. The blood could have been from a blood bank, or even from an animal. We'll have to ask Akane-san or Shinya-san to find out. But Shinya-san remained silent, refusing to answer. I let it be and continued. In the same sense, if the police had been here, they could have told us that the body was a day old already. But we're not professionals. All we know is the difference between dead and alive. Maybe after 10 days we would have been able to discern the age of the corpse, and maybe a little faster in the summer, but this isn't the summer. This is the season of blooming cherry blossoms. So they changed the corpse's clothes. Yes. Akane-san called Hikari-san to her room in the middle of the night just to show her what she was wearing. Kanami-san's body was already in the room at the time. The room has an inward opening door, so all she had to do was hide the body in the shadows behind it. As long as she came out to greet Hikari-san, Hikari-san wouldn't have entered the room. This was likely the riskiest part of the whole ploy. If there was ever a point that proved Akane-san was going out on a limb, it was this scene. But she had to go out on a limb. As I said before, she did it so that she could make us think that Kanami-san's body was hers. Also, to narrow down the time of the murder, to give her an accomplice, Shinya-san, a solid alibi. That night, Shinya-san was with Maki-san, drinking the whole night. Maki-san had invited him, but supposing he hadn't, he probably would have invited her. Or, it's even possible that he would have invited us instead of Maki-san. Of course, now that all was said and done, that was just a trivial detail. That's also why they smashed Kunagisa's PCs. The PCs in digital camera contained images of Kanami-san's corpse. If we carefully compared those images with Akane-san's corpse from the storage room, there was a chance that we would realise that they were in fact the same body. Actually, that's true, Kunagisa said. Something had been bothering me. The hands or the fingers or something. Yeah, that's it. It's not like Kanami-chan and Akane-chan have the same fingerprints. She let out a sigh. It seemed she was disappointed in herself for not noticing right off the bat. Everyone else probably thought that she was joking, but I knew she probably wasn't. For crying out loud. But why would they do such a thing? There are altogether too many possibilities as far as that's concerned. But, in my opinion, she was trying to erase her existence. Akane-san created a phantom 13th person by using the same body twice, and in doing so, succeeded in erasing her own existence. There are plenty of hiding places around here. It's a huge mansion, and many of the rooms aren't locked. And there was always the possibility that she was outside the mansion. Why would she need to erase her own existence? That's simple. Isn't it obvious? If she became a victim, if she herself was murdered, she would no longer be under surveillance. She would be free to move about, beyond the confines of thought and reason, like some kind of invisible woman. In which case, breaking Kunagisa's computers, for example, became a simple task. Even causing a fourth incident, such as another murder, would have been simple. We won't know for sure what they had planned unless we ask Akane-san or Shinya-san. We were going to kill everyone. This time, he was gracious enough to answer. He spoke with a coldness that told of a complete surrender. He spoke with indifference. Everyone on this island. But to do so, she had to remove herself. It became apparent that her ability to move around would be cut off, either by forming teams or by having everyone stay together in one place. So, she had to remove herself from everyone. And once she was outside, she would start picking off people one at a time, starting with the easiest prey. Shinya-san let out a weak chuckle. And here she did such a good job removing herself from the party. I never would have thought that she wouldn't even be able to kill a single person. I thought she'd at least get through half of you. Shall we have you explain the rest then, Shinya-san? No, he shook his head weakly. I'll leave all that to you. That's your role here. It's your job. I nodded without saying anything. Well then, I don't think I need to explain the first sealed room at this point, do I? That was just a trick to distract us. They just needed to go buy time until the second incident. But rather than just a coincidental product of the law of great numbers, maybe the earthquake just happened to occur and she thought of it right then. Of course, she was planning the murder all along, but maybe she only decided a specific plan once the earthquake occurred. Supposing that was the case, it was some incredibly quick thinking, and I can't help but be impressed. Anyway, there was an earthquake, and then Shinya-san called. However, it wasn't Kanami-san on the other end, but Akane-san. Then, Akane-san killed Kanami-san. Shinya-san said Kanami-san had said that the paint spilled, but that too was a trick. He used vague wording so that even if the trick was exposed, he could weasel out of it. Even I was tricked by that. Shinya-san laughed. That's a simple coincidence. Well, I can't speak as to that, but anyway, Akane-san killed Kanami-san. Then she put together that sealed room by intentionally spilling the paint. Well, at least I wasn't wrong when I originally said she was the killer. That's right, Irie-san. Certainly it was a high possibility, but that's all it was. Because Akane-san created a sealed room, we couldn't say for sure. We couldn't say for certain. Of course, that was the whole point of the sealed room, to put herself under the perfect level of suspicion. She placed herself in a position where she was the prime suspect, but when nobody could prove that she did it. Then she was locked in the storage room. Granted, I was the one who suggested it, but even if it hadn't said anything, Shinya surely would have. There were only so many rooms with locking doors, so it would have been easy for them to guess where she would be held. And there had always been plenty of time for them to get to know the mansion. Of course, we can only speculate here, and if you don't feel like talking Shinya-san about it, we'll never know the true answer. On that note, it seemed to me that Akane-san's big tiff with Kanami-san was also done to intentionally show their sour relationship. Akane-san had wanted to put herself in a risky position. You know, for later on. I didn't know whether the fact that Akane-san was the only one without an alibi, well, actually Rei-san too, was pure luck, or whether she had figured out the whole strategy, but it was probably just a coincidence. That's what I thought. So, then she switched with Ibuki-san's body, Irie-san said, and then showed herself to Hikari-san in the middle of the night, put the clothes that she'd been wearing on Ibuki-san, escaped, and then she hid away somewhere in the mansion, right? Then, during dinner, she was hiding right by the dining hall, listening in on Sashirona-san's hysteria. She overheard her saying that she was going to lock herself up in the room, so she turned back and hid herself in Sashirona-san's room. There's no lock after all. Then, there was a setup. So that means Sashirona-san's breaking down and accusing Hikari was all a ruse you set up, doesn't it? Yes, I nodded. We could have just found her at that point if we'd searched the whole mansion, but it's so huge, it just seemed like it would be a big hassle. So we set a trap instead. It was risky though. The amazing thing about you is that you were able to write that off as risky. I didn't know who was speaking for a second, but it turned out to be Maki-san. It was the first time she had given me a compliment without a hint of sarcasm. I was just a little pleased. But hang on a second. Irie-san placed her hand on her own head and remained like that for a moment. Something still seems off, she said. Why is it? Something seems strange to me. Are you wondering how Akane-san got out of the storage room? Yeah, that's it, Irie-san said with a clap of her hands. That's it. You haven't explained that yet. Did Shinya-san pull her up? Did she literally switch places with the corpse? Nope. Shinya-san was only outside the mansion when we buried Kanami-san's body in the mountains. At that time, he did drop the body in the storage room, but he didn't pull Akane-san out. Hikari-san saw her the following night at 2 a.m., right? Plus, Shinya-san had an alibi that night as well, so he couldn't have pulled Akane-san out. That much is certain. Then, did he drop a rope ladder down or something? That's not a rope ladder would have left a hole somewhere. I suppose it would have been possible if the rope was long enough, but Hikari-san saw that the window was closed at 2 a.m. Akane-san couldn't have tied the rope outside from inside her room. She would have needed an accomplice, but, as I said, Shinya-san was busy at the time, creating an alibi for himself with Maki-san. Then it's impossible, Irie-san pouted. My head's spinning in circles. I feel like I've got cyanosis here. You must mean vertigo. That's the only kind of thing you ever explained, huh? She grimaced. Well, you must know the answer, right? Yep, I nodded. She was locked in a room with a door that could only be unlocked from the outside, and a window that opens freely, and she wanted to get out. Iri-san, what would you have done in that situation? I can't possibly imagine. Spoken like a true princess. Well, what about you, Akari-san? I had already explained it to Hikari-san and Yayoi-san, so I asked Akari-san. I could have asked Terika-san, Rei-san, or even Maki-san, but Akari-san was my favourite, after all. And I was hoping to break the awkwardness lingering from this morning's events. I guess I would stretch my arms up and jump. Right, but even if you jumped, you wouldn't reach the window. We're talking about the storage room, right? If I was locked in there and jumping didn't work, next I would try standing on a chair, stretching my arms up and jumping. Even then you don't reach it. Then it's simple, she said with a forced, cheerful expression. I'd give up. That won't move the conversation anywhere. Well, it's over, right? Wow, she was blunt. Maybe it wasn't awkwardness. Maybe she just plain hated me. Well, whatever. Time to change the channel. Akari-san says that she would use a chair. That's basically what anybody would do, right? Like a monkey trying to reach a high-hanging banana. Are you calling me a monkey? She screamed, her face bright red. On you, rude! You don't know the meaning of the word delicacy, do you? Are you trying to infuriate me? My mistake. Seemed I'd changed channels in the wrong direction. No, that's not what I meant. And you don't have to get so angry. Monkeys are adorable. I've never been so insulted in my entire life. She cast her face away from me. From now on, you and I don't know each other. Her disdain for me was quite unquestionably clear. I was a little bit shocked. Damn it, Kunagisa. What about impressing her with my smarts? It was the exact opposite outcome. That's not good. Anyway, you stand on the chair, just like anyone would. You jump and you stretch your arms out. You still don't reach it. So what now? It's simple. You just get a taller chair. There's only one chair in the room. Well, chair is just a metaphor. It could be anything. So what was in that room? Nothing. Books, a futon, a lamp and table. There was something else, wasn't there? Something we all saw. It was practically all we saw. The silence fell over the crowd. Maybe they couldn't think of it. Maybe they had thought of it. Either way would have warranted such a reaction. It was Irie-san who finally answered. It was Ibuki's corpse, wasn't it? Bingo. I nodded. What else needed to be said? Rigor mortis reaches its peak around the first 24-hour mark. Well, depending on your sources. It was about 2 a.m, give or take, so almost exactly that much time had passed since Kanami-san was killed. Her body was probably stiff as a pole. I'm sure getting those clothes off her was no cakewalk, but there were merits here as well. I guess it had an upside and a downside. No cakewalk? It was a suit, for crying out loud. How do you get that off a stiff corpse? Maybe her joints were still moving, but still. Then she could have brought 2 pairs of the same outfit. That way she could get it on the body while it was still relatively loose in the afternoon. Maybe Kanami's removed dress was hiding behind the door. I continued without pausing. I arrived at this train of thought based on the reason of cutting off the head. That was, of course, so that Kanami's body could play the role of 2 people. Her face was a hindrance, but I believe there was one more reason to cut off the head. She may be the only person to have ever cut off someone's head for this reason. Yep. To flatten her shoulders. You mean, because if she hadn't done that, if the shoulders weren't flat, she couldn't have used them as a step? Because Kanami-san wasn't a sturdy stepping stool? Akari-san asked weakly, as if stricken with fear, or else hoping for some other answer. Is that what you're saying? Yes, I nodded. Not just a step, but a staircase. First, she placed the chair, then stood Kanami-san's body next to it, letting it lean against the wall a little. Then she used the chair as a first step, the body as a second, and made a final leap. Like a hop, step, and a jump maneuver. Then she stretched out her arms and finally reached the window. Kanami-san was always confined to a wheelchair, so I wasn't sure of her exact height. But considering Akane-san had thought to recycle the body that way, she was probably about as tall as Akane-san. And that was none too petite. Even without the head, she was at least 5 feet tall. If you added Akane-san's own height, it was a little over 10 feet. Plus, she was extending her arms. Plus, she jumped. As long as her hand made it to the window, all she had to do was pull herself up. The impact from the jump probably caused Kanami-san's body to topple over, but that was all for the better. It would have been hard for anyone to tell the body had been used as a step. And that's exactly why the head had been lopped off from the very base of the neck. It couldn't have been that easy. I mean, come on. She didn't have to succeed right away. I mean, she could have tried any number of times. It's not the type of thing you can do in 1 or 2 tries, but eventually she succeeded, and knocked Kanami-san's body down in the process. To be greedy, she probably wanted to close the window too, but you can only do that from the inside, so she probably just gave up on it. When we went to examine Akane-san's, by which I mean Kanami-san's body, the next day, the peak of rigor mortis had already passed, and the body had become somewhat loose again. Of course, I'm no specialist, so I can't really say for certain. That's... Akari-san was turning blue. It was the same broken down Akari-san that I had encountered this morning. Infuriated, or deep in despair. It's too terrible. It's too terrible. I can't forgive this. To kill a person, and on top of that cut their head off, and then dig up her buried corpse, and on top of that, disguise it as the body of someone else. That alone is unspeakably foul, but to then use the body as a chair, as a staircase, as a stepping stool. It's difficult to sit on a living person. To sit on a living person for nearly 30 minutes is nearly impossible, but I wouldn't say sitting on a dead person is very hard at all. Shinya-san recited. The words of Oe Kenzaburo. Don't you know it? Akari-san. Still blue in the face, Akari-san shook her head with a look of disgust. She looked like a small frightened animal, like she wanted to deny reality. I couldn't help but sigh. A corpse is something that's been thoroughly spent, with no sentience or personality, or even a spirit remaining inside it. Just as it has no longer the will or an essence, it is nothing more than a thing, and the owner of that thing utters no complaint as to what might become of it. And even supposing it wanted to, he or she was in no place to do so. There was a headless body. She recycled it as her own body. There was a headless body. She used it as a staircase. So what? When you die, that's the end. The fact that you've lived is irrelevant. It's nothing more than a fact. Everybody has a different idea about it, and that's their right. You can't complain about what others believe. I let out another sigh. So that's it, Irie-san. The minor details are a pain to explain, so please think about them for yourself. I'm sure there's an easy answer for everything else. Unfortunately, I'm not nice enough guy to explain it all. Please reason things out on your own. The minor details, huh? Irie-san said. What about the motives? I don't think you can write that off as trivial or a minor detail. You'll have to ask the murderers directly. I repeated the same line. I had already said a number of times at this point, and looked over at Shinya-san. So did everyone else. With a look of capitulation, Shinya-san prepared to give an answer, when a voice came from behind my back. You don't have to answer that, Shinya. I looked back. Standing at the entrance to the dining room was Akane-san. She was supposed to be resting in her room. How long had she been there? How much of my nonsense had she heard? Her arm was in a brace, but she still wore a fearless expression, as she looked down upon the crowd sitting at the round table. Akane-san. ER3 system, 7 fools, Soniyama Akane. Akane-san, who claimed that she would never complain no matter who, when, why, or how she was killed. But did that just mean that she would forgive herself no matter who, when, why, or how she killed? She laughed. Motive? Motive, you say? How silly. What a meaningless thing that is in a world this big. It hurts my brain to think about why you would even care about such trivia. I don't get it at all. She gave a sardonic smile as she continued. I was just trying to eat those brains of yours.